If somebody comes to you and says, hey, this is my experience, how do you respond?
Hi, I'm Karl Vaters, and welcome to the Church Lobby, Conversations on Faith and Ministry. My guest in this episode is Rachel Bren, and we'll be talking about the difficult but important subject of helping people recover from sexually related trauma. Rachel is a survivor of sexually related trauma, and now she serves in SRT services, which helps people recover from sexually related trauma. In this conversation, we talk about this important subject, how the church can help those dealing with it, some mistakes to avoid, and a whole lot more. And don't forget to stick around when the interview is done. I'll come back with my quick take on the first 2 steps pastors need to take so that we can be better at helping those who are dealing with sexually related trauma. Rachel Bren, welcome to the Church Lobby. It's good to have you here today.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
This is another one of those conversations that actually started in a church lobby, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, we were both at a conference in Wenatchee, Washington. Beautiful little town, by the way, that I've had a
It's
chance to go to a couple of
lovely.
times. Yeah, it really is nice. If anybody's looking for an out-of-the-way, not usual place to go in the Pacific Northwest, Wenatchee would be a great place to start. Beautiful city. And we had our book table, and 2 tables away, I think you were there. In between sessions, we started a conversation about what you and your ministry does. And partway through it, I said, okay, we need to continue this on the podcast because others need to hear about it. So you work for a ministry called SRT Services. SRT stands for Sexually Related Trauma. So can you walk us through, first of all, what is sexually related trauma and what does SRT Services do?
Yeah, so a little backstory. We know that about 50% of the adults have been affected by one of these 3 sexually related traumas. That's trauma due to sexual abuse or assault, trauma due to past abortion, and trauma due to miscarriage or stillbirth. Within those 3 traumas, our organization offers free support groups where we work through maybe the ways that we've coped through it. We have healing actions each week, really just to provide support for those who have experienced those traumas. Often this is the first time that they are sharing their story. Some of them, the first time they've shared it in its entirety. So we give a space for them to be able to just talk through what happened to them, recognizing the ways they've coped with it, all of that within the context of a safe environment of people who understand.
Okay, so about 50% have been directly affected by it, which means a much higher percentage than that have someone in their life who is dealing with it in a very direct way. So is there any help for those who are walking alongside those as well?
So that's a great question. Not necessarily through our organization. We are actually in the process. We have a podcast as well through SRT Services. It's called Grace and Grenades. Just this week, we're actually recording an episode on what it looks like to walk with someone when they are experiencing healing from these traumas. And so that will eventually be a good resource. But I think one of the best things that you can do for your relationships, whether that's romantic, your kids, your coworkers, is to address your own trauma. And when we don't do that, when we don't process what's happened to us, it can lead to things like anxiety and depression and suicidal thoughts and risky behavior, all sorts of maladaptive ways that we choose to cope and ignore. Addictions is where that can come in. So one of the best ways I think that you can help those relationships and those around you is to address your own trauma.
Okay. Now, obviously, there are all kinds of different traumas. What is it about sexually related trauma that is particularly important for us to understand?
One of the biggest things is sexually related trauma really gets to the core of our identity. These 3 traumas, each one a little unique, but the undercurrent of all of them is that I am worthless. I am broken. I have made mistakes. All of that gets and disrupts, for us at least, our biggest disruption we see is our relationships with others and our relationship with God. I think when we've experienced these traumas, I know for myself, I was sexually assaulted from a very young age, and it really brought into question this idea and this almost reconciling of, if God is good, how did I end up in this family? If God is a good father, why did he give me the family that I had? And so that gets to the core issues of trust and acceptance and our identity. Those all get affected when we experience these traumas. And so being able to come to a place, so in our groups, we like to describe it, we're not overtly religious, but we are evangelistic. And so part of the conversation that we have within our 8 weeks is about God and forgiveness, because we do think it just affects that relationship so deeply.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that you are a survivor of sexually related trauma. Would you mind walking through some of your story for us so we have some understanding of some of the specifics that we're dealing with here?
Yeah, so I hopefully I'll give a trigger warning. Hopefully, it's not going to traumatize anybody listening. But I grew up in a very religious home, and I didn't know that we were pretending. And so it was all very real to me. My relationship with God, I accepted Christ at a very early age. I think because of the traumas, I was nervous about whether God would stay. Like maybe I would
Mm.
do something bad enough that he would leave. And so I like to say I regularly asked Jesus to come into my life because I was
Mm.
just so nervous that it would
Wow.
not take for some reason. And so, yeah, my family was very dysfunctional and abusive. So, like I said, the abuse for me started around age 3, continued until I was about 23. And in that, when I was 14, and again, when I was 17, I got pregnant twice by my family and ended up having abortions, 2 abortions. And so that took a while. I think the way that I coped with it was what we would call socially acceptable. There's those clearly socially unacceptable ways that people cope through drugs and alcohol and promiscuity, all that. I went a different direction where I lent towards perfectionism and overachieving. And so on the outside, I looked like a really good employee. I was a great volunteer. I signed up for everything, but inside it was a way to mask what was happening and to avoid the reality of what was going on at home. So gosh, it took a while. I feel terrible because I didn't when I got married, I didn't tell my husband yet because I thought I was fine. I really thought I was okay. I didn't know how to make that connection, that the things I was experiencing, the thoughts I was having, I thought I was the only one who thought I was crazy and who didn't know how to cope with life and who struggled with not feeling like I was enough. And so I thought maybe if I just worked harder and if I never rested and if I kind of just pushed myself to the edge, then that would, I don't know if justify is the right word, but that would at least make up for what was happening. And so it wasn't actually until we had our second child that I finally had to come apart. I was like, listen, husband, I cannot do this anymore.
Mm.
I don't know what to do with these emotions. I don't know how to keep us all safe. I don't know how to feel safe in our home. Not that my husband was unsafe. He was a blessing from God, but I didn't know how to raise people to make good, safe decisions. And now I've got 2 children that I'm supposed to be in charge of stewarding their whole lives. And it just was too much.
So you didn't trust your own ability to make decisions regarding their lives as you should as a parent.
Oh, yeah.
Your own self-confidence as a parent was undermined because of what you'd experienced.
Oh, yes. Yeah. My self-confidence as a parent, even just simple decisions. I remember we were standing in the grocery store, and normally my husband does the grocery shopping. And so I was with him. He got a phone call and he's like, hey, can you pick out the coffee? And I almost started bawling because I was like, I don't know what to do. Because what if it's wrong? What if I make the wrong choice? What over coffee? And that again was one of those turning pivotal moments of, yeah, I don't think that's normal to freak out about coffee, to to start crying in the grocery store because I'm
Hmm.
nervous about what coffee to pick out. And so it really, I think those kind of key pieces were what, especially when we had kids, are kind of what started I probably need to talk to somebody about this. And what I found was SRT services. And so
Oh,
I
okay.
went through one of our 8 week groups and it completely changed my life. And I don't say that as a flippantly, it did. from that, I think it gave me purpose and calling. And I started volunteering with them as a facilitator. And then I like to say I was personably aggressive until they hired me. So I called them often
Hmm.
just to see if they had any job openings. So, and
Okay.
eventually they did.
Okay. Oh, so yeah, let me walk that back a little bit because I have been really blessed not to have experienced sexually related trauma myself, but as a pastor, I've walked a lot of people through that. So, what is it about your experience? Because I want to speak to those who are dealing with it themselves and are feeling the shame. What was it in your experience? You had that moment with the coffee where you felt like this is not normal. What was it that led you to say, okay, I actively need to seek some help rather than I need to try to figure it out myself? Because you described yourself as that person who was like, I'm going to fix this myself. I'm going to get it figured out. I do a talk on trauma where I talk through the stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I talk about how I've noticed that when people have gone through trauma, they often will pick one of those camps to kind of stay at, and maybe another one is a default. So it almost sounds like bargaining might be your default because you're going to just fix everything. You're the perfectionist. And the
Right.
other default would be denial, like, oh, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine with me.
Hmm.
What was it that broke those barriers? Obviously, it was that moment, but how is it that after that moment you went, okay, I've really got to get some help here? Why did you know you couldn't fix it yourself?
I heard this quote when I first started this whole process that said, climbing the mountain is hard, staying in the valley is hard. Choose your hard. And I think for me, it was one of those moments of I can no longer keep living like this. And I don't know if some people would describe that as rock bottom. It's almost like the truth. I just got hit right in the face with the truth that this is not a healthy way for me to live. I had all sorts of physical symptoms. I was constantly going to the doctor because I had stomach issues. And of course, they would run labs and everything was fine. And so it just hit this moment of I cannot keep going like this. And I did what I could to try to figure it out on my own and try to figure out, can I navigate this? Can I understand? I read a lot of books, which were helpful, and there was not, nothing inherently wrong with that, but it could only get me so far. And I think there, for me at least, was a moment of, and it probably the Holy Spirit of, are you going to let me help you with this? Because you can only go so far on your own. There are things that you need outside help with, outside perspective. I think that's one of the benefits of healing in community. And one of the benefits of our group is the freedom to be able to say, hey, this is how I'm feeling. And you have a whole group of people who say, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one who felt like that. Or I thought this was normal behavior, and there's a group that affirms that no, that's not actually normal. Maybe let's talk through some different ways that we could respond to some of those things. And so there definitely was just this moment of I cannot continue to do this on my own. I need an outside voice. It got to a point where I couldn't do it on my own, and I knew I couldn't do it on my own.
How did you know that your primary causal issue was sexually related trauma and not something else? Because I mean, it's right in the name of the group, so you're going there very purposely for that. How did you know to narrow in on that?
Yeah, I didn't.
Okay.
So it sounds a little goofy, but I had actually been working at a pregnancy resource center as their volunteer coordinator. And one of the questions I always asked our volunteers was, hey, if you have experience with sexual abuse or assault or past abortion, you need to attend this group. And for me, it was a little harder because, like I said, with perfection and overachieving, I was a really good employee. So nobody really knew that there was anything wrong, but I knew the experience that I had, even though I actively tried to deny it. And so eventually I kind of felt like a hypocrite because I tell all of our volunteers to go to this group, but I haven't gone. And so I showed up that first night, bless their hearts, they were so gracious with me because I showed up that first night and I said, I don't need this group. I'm just here to audit. I know. I'm just here
Wow.
to audit.
Like they hadn't heard that before from somebody else. Yeah, yeah.
I know. Yeah. So of course I tell them that I'm just finding out what to tell our volunteers that they can expect. And God's like, hey, since you're here, let's talk about some things. And I want you to really lean into this experience and I want you to ask the hard questions. And it was through like one of the weeks we talk about coping skills. And I did not know that perfectionism was a coping skill until that week. And I read the material, went through the healing action, and it was like a light bulb went off. And all of a sudden, I could see all of the ways that I had over the years compensated for this trauma through perfectionism and could recognize it as this is actually a coping skill and it probably doesn't serve me anymore. And so I need to learn how to let go of that and move on from that being my security to no, if things fall apart, that's okay. That doesn't change who I am. It doesn't change how God loves me. It doesn't change how he views me. It doesn't even really change how my family views me. But I think getting to that point of, okay, I'm okay with letting go of this. And if it turns out poorly, that's okay, which was scary.
How did it turn out in the immediate with the folks when they started finding out?
That part, it's always hard when you recognize and kind of have a mirror held up to, oh, this is why I'm doing these things. Okay. But I think one of the beautiful things about it is then being able to practice and finding that I really feel like I found my people and I found my community. And one of the things that I do even now where because I'm okay now that I don't know all the things that used to bother me that I did not know or was not good at all of the things. And so
Right.
now being able to have an honest conversation as the executive director, I need to have honest conversations with our staff. And I will just go into it and say, listen, this is going to be super clunky and I'm practicing and I need your grace in how to deliver this. So it's going to be twofold. One, I need to share some things with you, but two, I also need you to tell me how I'm doing because that's part of the relationship and the give and take. And so having the community around me to be safe enough to say, am I doing okay? Are we all right? I probably didn't respond to that super well. And I need to go back and repair those things. It's a process to learn how to let go of some of those coping skills. And some days I'm better at it. Some days I am not. And so being able to be around people who have grace and compassion about the fact that I'm still learning.
Okay. Yeah. So right now we're talking, primarily to pastors and church leaders. That's the main audience of this podcast. And unquestionably, there's going to be some who are listening who have sexually related trauma that they have not been honest about with others, that they have hidden or that they've tried to deny even to themselves. What would you say to the church leader who's hiding the sexually related trauma, trying to deny it? What do they need to do and why do they need to do it?
Great question. I think one of the things our former executive director used to say often was that a broken church will be ineffective at healing a broken community. And two, you can only lead your people as far as you have gone. And so when it comes to light or when you're willing to acknowledge that, hey, this is my story and I probably need to work through this, I think, buried things, they don't actually die, they just rot. And so the only real way to move forward is to process it. And so one of the biggest things that we suggest is joining one of our groups. And we have had pastors join and we've from Spokane and we have intentionally put them with facilitators who are not from the area with participants that there is never a risk that they will run into. So if you are looking for some anonymity, some confidential, which our groups are all confidential. And so we will not, like if I see you on the street, I'm not going to say anything. It helps that we have groups from all over the nation. So we've got participants and facilitators all over the nation. So you can join from the comfort of your own home and you don't have to worry about confidentiality because we don't live in the same city. So I think The other piece is just recognizing that these traumas absolutely affect the way that we respond to the people in our lives. And when we don't address it, we tend to get triggered a little more easily and a little quicker. And so I think when we're trying to help someone who has also experienced one of these traumas, but we haven't processed it on our own, our response to them is often not as maybe compassionate as it could be because they are rubbing up against something that we are afraid to expose. It's like a raw wound. Somebody rubs up against it, it hurts. And especially if you're trying to hide it. The other thing I think it does is I think it brings freedom, not only to you, but to your congregation. And half of your congregation is going to be struggling with one of these traumas. Either shame keeps them quiet, often shame keeps them quiet.
Yeah.
And so when you are brave enough to look into it and to dive into that conversation and into your own healing, you all of a sudden spark courage in other people to be able to do that for themselves as well.
Before we continue, I'd like to take less than a minute to mention 3 important items. First, if you're new to this podcast, it's a product of helping small churches thrive at karlvaters.com. We provide encouragement and resources for pastors of the 90% of churches that aren't big through workshops, books, articles, this podcast, and more. Second, our current project is to raise approximately $20,000 to help us conduct small church pastor workshops in Indonesia, Malaysia, Austria, Switzerland, and Germany in 2025, including translating and printing one of my books, The Grasshopper Myth, into the Indonesian language to give for free to 1,000 small church pastors. The churches that need our help can typically afford it the least, so if you'd like to help us do this, you can support us at karlvaters.com/support. And third, you can subscribe to my free weekly newsletter and get all the latest resources and news at karlvaters.com/subscribe. Links for all of this will be in the show notes. Now, back to my interview. Okay, let's talk through some of that because there's some subtlety in this that I want us to make some distinctions on, especially for those of us who are in church leadership. One of the fears that I know they're going to have is, but if I tell them this, then I'm going to lose X, Y, or Z. And I do believe, and I know that there are right and wrong ways to tell that story and right and wrong people to tell that story too. So
For sure.
walk us through who are the people and what are some good, healthy ways to begin to tell that, and what are some red flags, some places that you should not go, and some people that you should not tell this to.
Yeah, so Beth Moore, she wrote a book several years ago called Sacred Secrets. And in that book, she talks about this concept of honesty with all, transparency with some, intimacy with few. And essentially, that's the model that Jesus described, just in different words, of the 72, the 12, and the 3, right? So this idea that you're probably not going to share all of the details. For me, I can be honest and say, hey, here's what happened to me. This was my experience. This is how I responded to it. There are going to be a few people who know a little more of the details of that. And there's only a handful who know pretty much everything, where I process with them everything that's happened. And so you're going to want to be choosy about that. I think if the person has a history of safely and gently holding pieces of your story anyways, then they're probably a safe one to talk to. And I think asking them permission that, hey, I'd like to share something with you that might be hard. I want you to think about it because it has the potential to traumatize you as well. And then there are going to be some people that you know that when you even share the smallest detail, somehow it gets twisted or blown out of proportion, where they are just inherently not safe or gentle with who you are and the things that you share. I would not be intimate with those people about the details. I think being honest with them, I think, is always good, but they don't need to know everything. And so one of the things actually in our groups that we talk about is finding healthy community. And how do you do that? And how do you know our groups are a really great place to start that conversation? And just to kind of flesh out, here's my story, here's how I responded to it. How do you recognize those people? Obviously, you're not going to want to go tell the cashier at Walmart. That's not the context or the place. Truthfully, for pastors, they may need somebody outside of the church that they can talk to, that they can share really intimately about what they're struggling with. And our groups are a really great place to do that for them. So I'd say there are signs, if you're paying attention to them, for those people who are actually hold your story well. They'll do it. It's like being responsible with small things. You can be responsible with big things. The same is true with our stories. If somebody is responsible and holds it gently, then chances are they will hold some of the bigger things gently as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think one of the things I love about something like SRT services is, as you've mentioned already, this can be told anonymously, safely, but also you're talking to people who have some knowledge and experience and expertise in this, so they can even help you with the tools to know how to share it with your loved ones in a way that will not cause damage to either you or to them in the manner in which you share it. And when you're in the trauma, you don't necessarily have the right judgment to know who that might be. So getting tools from someone who can be a little more objective is probably a best place to start, especially if you're just not sure.
Yeah, and one of the other things on the flip side of that that we do at SRT Services is I remember my husband was a youth pastor when we first got married. One of the students had confided in me that she essentially had been date raped. This guy came over to her house, her parents weren't home, they made the choice to drink, and he took advantage of her. And on the outside, I feel like I played it pretty cool. Internally, I was freaking out. I had no clue. This was the first time that this had really come up with one of our students. I had no clue how to respond. And I hear coming out of my mouth, well, I'll go with you when you tell your mom. I was like, obviously I did, but internally I just kept thinking, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no
Yeah.
clue how to have this conversation. So one of the things that we do is we can come alongside pastors and church leaders just to help equip you to have those conversations. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, this is my experience, how do you respond? How do you hold it gently? What are the things that you need to be looking for? How can you support them in that? Where do you send them for help? So that's part of one of the other things that we do just on an organizational side outside of our groups is partnering with businesses and churches so that they do feel like they can have these conversations with people they meet in the community, their congregants, anybody that shares that information. So they're not left feeling like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't know how to help you with this. So
Yeah.
that is something else that we do.
Yeah, no, that's a great way, because I wanted to make that segue from those who have dealt with and are dealing with sexually related trauma to those who are helping people who are dealing with sexually related trauma. So talking to pastors and other helping professions who are looking around and going, oh, I know people who could use this. And unlike, your experience where I'm just here to observe, I don't have a problem, people who actually do not have this
Yes.
experience, but are in fact in the room to help others, what would be the first step for them to take? How do they get a hold of you, and what is the process that they would go through to begin to get more expertise to be able to help people in their congregations or under their care with sexually related trauma?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. They can always start right away with, hey, if this is your experience, go to srtservices.org. Our intake process is pretty simple. Fill out the form with the corresponding trauma that you want to go, group that you want to attend. Our intake coordinators, we have two. We have a guy and a gal. So all of our groups are gender specific. So if you're a guy and you sign up for our Savanon group, which is our Sexual Abuse Victims Anonymous group, our men's intake coordinator will reach out. If you're a female, then our women's intake coordinator will reach out. And they do a really, really good job of making sure that you're group ready, that you're ready to kind of start this process. Part of why we actually started our podcast called Grace and Grenades is because it felt like we started this process and just a bomb went off in our life. And it, for a little while, it feels like things get worse before they get better. And so we work really hard to make sure that everybody is kind of aware of that and group ready. And then we'll put you in a group and get you started. We have groups that launch every month, so you shouldn't have to wait too long to join a group. And then the other thing you can do is email me, Rachel at srtservices.org. I can get you set up with, we can come and talk to your church. We've got some church videos that just explain if you're nervous to be the one to bring up the topic of sexually related trauma. We've got videos that you can show on Sunday mornings. And then I can get you set up with some of the trainings that we do for how to have those conversations and really how to understand what is happening inside a person's brain when they experience trauma, what is happening to them physically, helping them understand why they are making the decisions that they're making. So easiest way is just to reach out, email me directly. And if you want to join a group, then going to our website and filling out the inquiry form.
Okay. In the bonus material, you and I are going to talk a little bit further to pastors and churches who do want to partner with SRT services to offer sexually related trauma services and ministry in their local church. So if you are really interested in pursuing that, you can get the bonus material really easily. Go to karlvaters.com/support. And if you become a regular supporter, you will get a bunch of things, including our weekly newsletter, in which all of the links for all of the bonus material happen every week. Or you can get the links for the bonus material alone if that's all you want by going to karlvaters.com/subscribe, and you will get the weekly newsletter. So we will do that after this. It'll be 5 or 10 minutes where we'll get a little more specific about how to partner with SRT services on this if you want to have more sexually related trauma support in your church. Before we start to bring this to a conclusion, though, we've talked about some of the positive things we can do, both whether we've been affected by it or we're trying to help people who have been affected by it. But I've got to imagine that there are some, you even use the term grace and grenades as the name of the podcast. Great podcast title, by the way. And it makes
Thank you.
sense why you've named it that, given how you just described it. But what are some of the grenades? Because this is obviously a sensitive area. We use terms like trigger warning and so on, and we should. What are some common mistakes that families and churches make that we need to be aware not to avoid when we're trying to help people who have been dealing with sexually related trauma?
Some of the common things that you would want to avoid if, let's say with sexual abuse or assault, if somebody says to you, hey, this was my experience, you want to avoid things like, well, what were you wearing? Or maybe you shouldn't have been drinking, or those are not helpful. All that does is add more shame to it. So avoid that. If someone confides in you that they had a past abortion, responding with, well, you killed your baby, that's not helpful. Those are things we just need to eliminate from our conversation. If you've experienced a miscarriage or stillbirth and somebody confides in you and the response is, well, you can always have more kids. Right. That's not helpful. It's true. You could, but that's not, all that does is diminishes the grief that they're feeling.
It's like if someone's lost their spouse and your first response is, well, there's plenty of fish in the sea, right? It's like,
Yeah.
that's not what they need. Yeah.
No, those would be things that we would always recommend you just avoid. That's, I think, the difference between sympathy and empathy. And Brene Brown has a wonderful video on the difference between sympathy and empathy. But I think coming alongside them and really being broken with them, I think is one of the most beautiful things that can happen. I know for me in our groups, even with some of my closest friends, I'll share a part of my story that I've never shared before. And the way that they hold it with honor, and I mean, I'll look over and they're both crying. I think it gives a sense of honor that I sometimes can't give my own story, for them to be able to recognize the pain. Because I think we all experience our lives. This is my experience. This is how it is. There's lots of times where it's like, oh, I just thought that was normal because it's my lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
But to be able to be around those people who understand the depth of heartache that can happen with these traumas and who are willing to sit in it with you. So I think if we can become people who are not afraid of the messy and are not afraid of legitimately sitting with broken, wounded people, and that I think starts with people in our own church.
Yeah. One of my early lessons for pastoral counseling and just pastoring in general and helping people through grief, trauma, sorrow was stay more, say less.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes.
I was taught how to speak and to answer problems and answer questions and resolve problems, but I wasn't taught just how to be a simple Christ-like presence in people's lives, and that's what they really need. Is it reminds me always of the early part of the book of Job, when we call them his comforters sarcastically. When they came and showed up, what we skip over is that there's a verse that says they sat with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one said anything because of how great his grief was. And
Yes.
that to me, that's what he needed. And then they started talking and everything all went to pieces.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep, they were making all the mistakes you just said not to make. Well, you must have done something wrong. God wouldn't
Yeah.
punish you if everything that they say is exactly what you just said. These are the things not to do to someone in grief. So, yeah, very careful. Just being a simple presence. I want to walk through though. You mentioned earlier Savanon, but there's 3 different Anons that you offer. Let's walk through each of them so people
Yes.
have some understanding of what you do have available. So you've got Savanon. That is what, and what does it do?
Yes. So that is our Sexual Abuse Victims Anonymous. That is the group where we focus on sexual abuse and assault. So if you attend that group, that's the conversation. You're going to be with other folks who have also experienced sexual abuse or assault. The curriculum is kind of tailored towards processing that particular trauma. We also
Okay.
have Abanon, which is our Abortion Anonymous. And that one, you will be in a group with other folks who have experienced past abortion. And so that curriculum is also tailored. Each one is a little bit different. They all have healing actions. There are some pretty core things that we talk about in each one, but the focus obviously is a little different for each one. So Savanon and Abanon, and then we also have Missanon, which is our Miscarriage and Stillbirth Anonymous. So you would be in a group with those who have experienced miscarriage or stillbirth, and that would be curriculum is catered towards that particular trauma.
Terrific. So there's a lot of help there, a lot of different ways to go on that. Again, we'll do the bonus round in a little bit and that you can watch if you get the link. You can watch that on the YouTube channel where we'll be talking about how you can partner with them if you want to do a better job at responding to sexually related trauma to help people in your church that way. But before we finish this main part of the podcast here, let's take you through the lightning round and see how that goes. All right.
Okay.
Question number 1. What are the biggest changes you've seen in your field of ministry in the last few years, and how have you adapted to them?
I know nobody really likes to talk about COVID because that was a rough season for
Mhm.
everyone. But I think what happened is when COVID hit, all of a sudden the world was isolated with their own issues, their own trauma, their own heads. And for us, it really exploded. And I think we're seeing this in the world today, this idea that people are no longer willing to stay silent about their trauma and
Mhm.
they need somebody to talk to about it. And so I think that's one of the biggest changes is this shift in we no longer keep things quiet. We no longer brush them under the rug. I think collectively as a society, we have experienced so much trauma that we don't want to anymore. That's not a sustainable way to live. And so in our line of work, that is one of the biggest shifts with COVID, the Me Too movement, people being brave enough to say, hey, this was my experience and here's how I responded to it. Our former executive director, he always used to say, courage inspires courage and action inspires action. And I think that's really what we've seen over the past several years is this move towards I feel like I can talk about it because somebody else started the conversation for me and I feel comfortable stepping into that. So, yeah, that's probably one of the biggest changes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for maybe a couple decades, apathy and secrecy seemed to be the bywords for a lot of families and a lot of churches.
Yes.
Now it's not about that anymore. There is a more passion and there's more willingness to share. And sometimes that pendulum swings too far and there's overshare, and we all understand that. But that doesn't mean that we should lock it back down again either. I think we've moved more towards a healthy center, even given the extremes on the other end.
Yeah, I agree.
Second, what free resource like an app or a website has helped you lately that you would recommend for small church ministry?
So there's a couple. Obviously, I think our resource is one that would be helpful. I also think so. Dan Allender, he has a school and a conference. It's called the Storywork Conference. And that is really just an amazing way to learn how to sit with your own story. So he has a podcast, and Adam Young has a podcast. Those are two that I would recommend. There's a couple in our line of work. Adam Young has a couple podcasts on attachment styles, on how we attach to each other, and then how we attach to God. And those I think are helpful for anybody who works with people that you want to point towards Jesus, just in understanding how they're wired and why they might attach and respond to each other and to God in particular ways. So those would be Adam Young and Dan Allender are resources that we use to teach and equip us and our staff as well. And so I think they're wonderful resources for anybody.
Great. We'll put links to those in the show notes, along with a link to Grace and Grenades podcast and SRT services as well for everybody. Number 3, what's the best piece of ministry advice you've ever received?
So this was several years ago, and I'll try to keep the story brief, but I think his name was Jim Elliot, right? He was the missionary
Yep.
over island, really unchurched people.
Through Gates of Splendor was the book. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he obviously, spoiler alert, sorry guys, he dies because this tribe kills him. Well, his son goes back to that same tribe that killed his dad, and his son was being interviewed, and the reporter said, I don't understand, why did you do that? And he said, well, somebody has to go first, but somebody has to go second. And so for me, the best bit of advice was sometimes I, like with my kids, I go first a lot. And it feels like I'm dying because they're raising children is hard. And I need those outside voices like youth group and Sunday school to go second and affirm those things that we are teaching at home, that we are being intentional about. My daughter will come home from youth group, and something we have been saying to her for months, youth group leader says, and it's like the best idea ever. And so
Yeah.
I feel like that was just the best advice for me, is that sometimes I go first and sometimes I go second. And I won't even necessarily know that I am the one who is affirming something that they have already heard, a conversation they have already had. But being willing to be obedient to where God is leading and going with him, and then just doing the thing, that was probably the best bit of advice. I have ended it up in a lot of random, miraculous, really weird situations because I have said, okay, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's hugely helpful advice. The being the second is something I think we really do undervalue. Sivers has a very short TED talk on, I think he calls it the law of the first follower. It's only about 2.5 minutes long. It's really short, but it talks about the importance of that second person, the first follower. And you see it scripturally as well. The disciples were first followers. The Apostle Paul was a first follower. And this is part of the reason Jesus says, I must go. Like, I've got to get out of here. It's only from Jesus' voice. Obviously, he's God incarnate, but there's something special about somebody being the second voice to confirm that changed things. In fact, to such a degree that a lot of cynics call Paul the one who invented Christianity, because the power of his second voice was so strong and so essential. So I see, and I'm aware of that as well. So 1, don't despise the second follower, and 2, step into that whenever you can. It's amazing quite often how you'll see even more obvious positive response to you being a second to some ideas than you are being the first in some ideas. So yeah, that's wonderfully helpful. Number 4, then we'll conclude it with this. What's the funniest or weirdest thing you've ever seen in church?
So one of the weirdest, craziest, when we lived in Oregon, the church that we attended, about a year before we had gotten there, there was a weird murder in the town. And Dateline actually came because the family went to that church that we were moving to work in this church. We were going to work there. So Dateline was there to interview. So their daughter was murdered. And then a year later, their worship pastor was attacked by the same guy. And it was like, what is happening? I remember this idea of, are we safe moving into this small town? I feel like we should be, but that was they did end up finding the guy. He was arrested and all of that, but that's probably the craziest.
Yeah, that's low on the funny scale, high on the weird scale for sure. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. If anybody wants to find you online, follow up on any of this, I think you mentioned your email before, but mention it again.
Yeah. So it's Rachel at srtservices.org.
All right. And all those links will be in the show notes as usual. And if you do want to hear any of the bonus material, we're going to talk for just a few minutes. It'll be on the YouTube channel only for subscribers. We're going to talk about how your church can get more involved using the services of SRT Services so that you can be more helpful in coming alongside those who are dealing with sexually related trauma. Rachel, thank you so much for the work you do. It is so important. It's such a challenge. It's such a blessing for us to be able to access these tools. And thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Trauma has been a big topic of conversation in the culture lately, and justifiably so. As Rachel mentioned, about 50% of your congregation has likely been exposed to sexually related trauma, and almost everyone is living with or related to someone who is dealing with its effects. So, my final takeaway today is this: 2 steps for pastors. Step 1, don't be afraid to step up. 2, don't be afraid to step in. First, assess your own sexually related trauma. Step up if that applies to you, and it's likely that it applies to about half of my listeners right now. Don't think it's just something that other people are dealing with it. Deal with your own stuff first. Become healthy first. Find recovery first. Second, step in. Step into the lives of the people you're serving who are dealing with the effects of this. Find the help you need so that you can help them. This episode was produced by Veronica Beaver. It was edited by Karl Vaters. Original theme music was written and performed by Jack Wilkins of jackwilkinsmusic.com. The graphic design is by Solomon Joy. And me, I'm Karl Vaters, and I hope to talk with you again in the church lobby.